Hi, it's Katrina! From the very first Viking city to mysterious burials, here are 10 amazing recent discoveries about the Vikings. Number 10. The first Viking city. The city of Ribe in western Denmark was the first Viking city in Scandinavia and the source of numerous archaeological discoveries. As a part of the Northern Emporium Project, scientists have been digging down to 10 feet, where the first traces of the original settlements can be found. They have unearthed literally thousands of objects, such as beads, amulets, coins, and combs, along with more unexpected things like pieces of musical instruments and items with runic inscriptions on them. There's still far more to find here, though, and researchers are particularly interested in why it was this place that formed into the first Viking city, instead of any other. It's unusually far away from any other large settlement, but the key seems to be because of the maritime links. Ribe would have been a center for trade, and it was fundamental to creating the Viking Age that we know of, because from here the people could travel virtually anywhere in Europe by boat. Pretty clever and very strategic. Number 9. Burials in Italy. We usually think of Vikings living in the regions around Northern Europe and perhaps North America, but a discovery in Italy has shown a different side to the seafarers. Near the capital of the island of Sicily, Palermo, a grave was discovered with 10 skeletons. The unusual thing was that these remains are almost certainly the descendants of Vikings. The 800-year-old burials were found in the grounds of the church of San Michele del Golfo, and some are believed to have been important figures in the community because of the way they were buried. The bodies, because of their tallness and large build, were clearly of Normans, the descendants of the Vikings, who led expeditions across Europe and made settlements in southern Italy, England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. The structures in the region also date from that time and prove that the reach of the Vikings was much further than many had initially thought. Number 8. Brutal ancestors. The Vikings were renowned for their violent tendencies, but it seems as if they were relatively calm in comparison with their own ancestors, if a discovery made beneath a Swedish lake is anything to go by. The grave that was found there contained the remains of 9 adults and a child from the Mesolithic age and included several skulls that showed signs of repeated blunt force trauma, as well as 2 that bore the marks of having been mounted on wooden stakes. Each person buried there is thought to have suffered from violent deaths, which was something quite common during that time. It's not clear whether these particular people were killed in battle or just as part of day-to-day living, but it definitely shows that life was far more brutal around 7,500 years ago than it became even in the times of the Vikings. Number 7. Confirmation of a legend. Every culture has its own myths and legends, but it's very rare that proof is found that the stories are true, and that's exactly what researchers discovered during a dig in Trondheim in Norway. According to Sverre's saga, a record of events of one of the kings of Norway and one of very few manuscripts that have survived from Viking times, in 1197, the king and his troops were attacked at his castle stronghold called Sverresborg. His rivals, the Baglers, won this conflict and burned down all of the buildings, along with ruining the castle's freshwater supply by throwing one of the king's dead soldiers into the well and filling it up with stones. Archaeologists have now excavated the well and have found evidence to suggest that these events did, in fact, occur. They even found a skeleton down there, which has been dated back to the end of the 12th century, which is exactly when the attack was said to have happened. Furthermore, a huge amount of stone had been dumped on top of it, and the whole site gives a unique glimpse back to events at the time. The exposed timber posts and linings show how these structures had been built, and it's a sobering thought that this was someone's final resting place. Number 6. Music and beads. I told you about the Viking city of Ribe and the artifacts that were found there, but there have been a series of discoveries from there and elsewhere that give us much more insight into what the daily lives of the Vikings were like. Rather than being all about the pillaging and attacking coastal towns, they were a culture that enjoyed music, making beads, and creating decorative ornaments. There have been hundreds and even thousands of items found, such as musical instruments, jewelry, and artworks, suggesting the presence of craftsmen and musicians alongside the farmers and warriors that we often hear about. Music was an integral part of festivities. They even sang love songs and lullabies. We don't, however, have any record of the precise music that they played, though, so we can only guess based on the fragments of instruments that have been discovered. Beads and jewelry like the ones found in Ribe would have been crucial to Viking trade in the surrounding regions and helped to prop up the economy so the armies could plunder. But this began to change when mass-produced glass beads from the region of present-day Syria began to be imported and undercut the local prices. Number 5. Burial chambers. In 2017, researchers announced what they believe to be one of the most significant discoveries ever made in Denmark, a series of chamber graves in the hamlet of Horning near Skanderborg. These weren't remains of a typical burial because it soon became clear they were the location of the final resting place of an extremely important member of Viking society, who has been called the Fregerslev Viking. As you'd expect from the burial of such a high-ranking person, he was buried alongside a number of valuable artifacts, including a set of gilded fittings from a horse bridle, one that would have only been available to the most powerful people of the time. Dating back to the year 950 AD, it's been suggested that the Fregerslev Viking could have been the confidant of the king, Gorm the Old, or maybe even a rival. So far, only a small portion of the burial chambers have been excavated, but they're hoping that there's far more to find and could potentially end with a whole new understanding of Viking life. Number 4. Harald Bluetooth's treasure trove. Harald Bluetooth was one of the last Viking kings between about the year 958 to 986 and was credited with mass changes across the empire, including the construction of a number of forts, encouraging cultural pursuits, and even building the oldest known bridge in southern Scandinavia. His influence reached far and wide, and in January of 2018, a 13-year-old boy and his father uncovered a hoard that's believed to be from his reign. At first, they found a single silver coin near the village of Schaprode, which is on the German island of Rügen in the Baltic Sea. Local archaeologists, upon hearing of the find, came to help look further and have now found hundreds of silver coins, rings, pearls, and bracelets. It's the largest Viking find to have ever been made in the region, and more than 100 of the coins can be directly linked to Harald's time, and it's likely that this treasure was hidden towards the end of his reign or soon after. Number 3. Burial mounds. In early 2019, almost 1,000 years after the Viking Age ended, archaeologists announced the discovery of a rare find near the town of Halden in Norway. It was a burial mound, but this one contained several longhouses and a ship. The ship itself is a little more than 65 feet long and was less than a foot beneath the topsoil. After initial investigations, the lower part of the vessel appears to be well preserved and will provide a great insight into Viking shipbuilding techniques. The area is now being further excavated to find out what else may be here. Amazingly, it was only found when a farmer was trying to dig ditches in a boggy field to allow for drainage. So the team has only a limited amount of time to carry out their investigations before having to return the field back to the farmer. Number 2. Mass grave of the Great Heathen Army. The Great Viking Army, also known as the Great Heathen Army, was a coalition of warriors from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden who grouped together to invade England and avenge the death of Ragnar Lothbrok in the year 816. After taking a great deal of land, they were finally defeated by Alfred the Great at the Battle of Edington and retreated back. But what happened to the hundreds of members of this army that died in the battles? In the 1980s, a site in Repton, Derbyshire was excavated and proved to be a mass grave that many thought was linked to the Vikings. Radiocarbon testing, however, showed the bones to have come from different time periods, and so it remained a mystery. That was until last year, 2018, when new radiocarbon techniques were used. The problem the researchers found was that if you eat a lot of seafood, one of the favorite meals of the Vikings, older carbon gets into your bones than if you eat land-based food sources, so carbon dating methods can be inaccurate. Recalibrating the tests showed all of the bodies to have come from the same time period, when the Great Army was traversing England, so it's now believed that the vault that contains the remains of nearly 300 people was built for the Vikings. The well-constructed vault also suggests that the Vikings themselves built it while using a nearby monastery as a winter camp, and moved the remains here from somewhere else. It's a memorial of those lost along the way, soon before the final battle that stopped the marauding army in its tracks. Number 1. Female warriors. If you imagine a Viking warrior, you're probably thinking of a big, gruff guy with a beard, covered in armor, and carrying an axe. This is, of course, purely a stereotype, and the Viking warriors were a very diverse group. In 1878, a burial site was discovered on the site of Birka, a Viking town from the year 750 to 950 in central Sweden. The body was clearly of someone important, having been put in an underground wooden chamber and being dressed in steppe-style clothing. The remains of 2 horses were in there too, as well as a sword, an axe, knives, 2 spears, 2 shields, and a quiver of 25 arrows. This site was clearly the tomb of a warrior. There were other objects too, such as a bag of antler dice and 28 gaming pieces, with the king piece having been carefully placed on the body's lap. For a long time, assumptions were made about this person's identity, but 2016 analytical techniques showed that this warrior was female, not male as many had presumed. This has forced researchers to rethink their understanding of how the Viking Empire worked. They clearly welcomed both men and women as fighters and weren't as split down the lines of gender as had been previously thought. Thanks for watching! There have been a lot of Viking discoveries recently. Hope you learned something new. Be sure to subscribe and I'll see you soon.